Hi everyone, thank you so much for watching this video today. We will be talking a bit about financial aid and scholarships in the United States. I'm going to have each of our panelists introduce themselves and then we will get going with our discussion. So I believe, Megan, if you'd like to take it away.
Hi, everybody. My name is Megan Mankerian-Stem, and I am the Director of International Enrollment at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska. So my institution is a private mid-sized school of about 9,000 students, half for undergraduate, half for graduate and professional students. We have students from all 50 states of the US and about 50 countries. So we do see a lot of students coming from all over, which is great. We'll get specifically into what our institutions look like for scholarships and financial aid later on. But just know that, everything is fluid, and we will be knowing for sure what our financial aid and scholarships will look like in the next coming couple of weeks.
Hey everyone, my name is Joseph Martinez and I am Senior Assistant Director for International Admission at Fordham University in New York City. We are a mid-sized institution as well. On the upper tier, I would say, of mid-sized institutions, altogether we have about 15,000 students, including graduate and undergraduate. At the undergraduate level, we have about 9,000 students split between two campuses, one in the Bronx and one in Manhattan. And we have representation from 48 states as well as around 80 countries. And I'm very happy to be here today. So I will pass it back to Sarah to introduce Macalester.
Great, thank you so much. And again, my name is Sarah Schmidt. I'm the Associate Director for International Admissions at Macalester, which is a highly selective liberal arts and sciences college located in St. Paul, Minnesota, so in the upper Midwest. As a small residential liberal arts and science college, we are strictly undergraduate. So there are no graduate programs, although many of our graduates do go on to graduate study. We have just under 2,100 undergraduate students, about 15% of whom are international students, and another 8 to 9% are US dual citizens. And they all represent about 97 different countries. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Joseph to get us started.
Thanks, Sarah. So many of you may be wondering what is happening with financial aid and scholarships, particularly for international students in light of the pandemic. We're here to tell you that our institutions, specifically Macalester, Fordham, and Creighton, are committed to maintaining financial aid for international students. And that will manifest itself in a few different ways, and we will explain those ways in just a few moments. I think the most important thing to note is this year is a challenge for everyone in many different ways. And so as you continue your college search, more specifically, as you narrow down your college list and you reach out to individual institutions regarding scholarships and financial aid, it's important to ask what the specific institution is doing in light of the pandemic, and if they are maintaining levels of support that they've had in the past that some of your college counselors or career advisors may be familiar with. It's probably good just to check in and verify that those options are still available. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and just define a few things that some of you may know and some of you may not know what they mean. So the first term, or the first, sort of financial aid, a type of financial aid, would be something that is called need-based aid. And need-based aid is not offered by every institution, but for those that do, it simply means that we will be evaluating your financial aid package based on what your family can afford. How do we find that out? Well, there are a couple of forms that many institutions use. The most popular may be the CSS profile, which you may have heard of. It's administered by the College Board, which also administers your AP exams and SATs. And then there are other couple of forms. Most notably, there is the, the free, one of you want to help me out with the free student international?
The ISFAA, but I never remember what each letter is.
So, all right.
ISFA, I think it's the International Student Financial Aid Application.
That is correct. Thank you all so much. I love the phone a friend option that we have here today. So there are a couple of options. It's best to ask every individual institution what they will expect from you if you are applying for need-based aid. And so these forms typically generate a number that is called the Expected Family Contribution, otherwise known as EFC in admission counselor lingo. And this number will tell us the amount of money that your family can be expected to pay out of pocket in any given year to offset the cost of your education at any one of our institutions. The rest of what is not met is called your unmet need. Yes, so, and then the other type is merit-based aid, and merit-based aid, most of the time you do not have to apply. However, there are a few exceptions with institutions that require applications to specific scholarships or specific grant opportunities. And merit-based aid is not based on need, it's simply based on your application. Most institutions will implement what is called a holistic review, looking at everything that you send them from your transcripts to your application, your essay, your letters of recommendation, and determine how you fare among other applicants to that institution. Most of these merit awards will go to the top percentage, top 1%, top 10%, top 5%. Each institution will stipulate what the criteria are for those scholarships on their website. So when we are determining these awards, whether they're need-based or not, there are two lenses, I should say, when looking at your application. The first will be need aware or need sensitive. And what this means is when we are evaluating your application and you are applying for financial aid, we will look at all of your documents that you've sent along with your application, in addition to looking at your financial aid documents. So the CSS profile or the ISFAA, and those forms will be looked at as a whole and determine whether or not A, you are admitted, and B, if you are given financial aid, okay? The second is need blind, and that means that we will look at your application and admit you regardless of your ability to pay. We will not look into your finances. We will not evaluate any sort of form at the time of admission, and we will be happy to admit you based on the content of your application without regard to anything regarding financial aid. So I now invite my two colleagues to chime in on anything that I may have skipped out on or missed, but that's a general sense of the basic terms that one should know when looking at different financial aid or scholarship options. And then with that, I'll turn it over and then we can talk about our individual policies at our schools.
Thanks, Joseph. I'll just add that it's always important, I think, to think of need-based aid, merit-based scholarship versus the question of are you need aware and need blind as being actually two separate questions, right? So if you ask a school, are you need blind or are you need aware, that is an admissions question, right? That is telling you something about how the admissions process is making their decision of who to admit. It does not necessarily connect to whether a school is going to meet 100% of that demonstrated need. So if you are a student or a family that knows that you're going to need some kind of need-based financial assistance to help cover the cost of an education in the United States, then it's actually a two-part question that you should be asking. Yes, ask, are you need blind or need aware? But then also make sure you're following up with the question of, if you consider international students for need-based financial aid, do you meet 100% of need or do you have unmet need as well? Because there are certainly schools that may be need blind in the process of offering admission. That does not mean that they are going to guarantee that they're going to provide full financial aid, depending on their policies.
In addition to that, the one thing I would add is every university does things differently. So what one university might tell you, especially when it comes to their total cost, either for tuition or their true total cost of attendance, every institution is going to be different. So as you're narrowing down your list of universities that you're applying for, I mean, it's great that you're watching this video so you can understand that financial fit is very important in this process as well. But you're going to need to ask every institution, are you need aware or need blind? And what kind of scholarships and financial aid do you offer? And what is the total cost of attendance? So that way you can start to understand, you know, is this university going to financially work for me and my family? And start really planning out the next 4 years of that financial cost.
Thank you all so much. And I think with that, I think we have a decent understanding of the basic terms and those preliminary questions that one should ask. And so I'll turn it back over to you, Megan, so that you can discuss Creighton's school's policy about financial aid.
So we are need blind. So that means when you're going through your application, we will never ask to see any financial statements, a CSS profile, anything like that. At the time of admission, we also award you your merit-based scholarship. Every student is eligible for a merit-based scholarship. We don't ask for any additional paperwork for this or additional forms or applications. So as soon as I'm reviewing your application, if I know you're admissible, I automatically do your scholarship, your main scholarship. After that, we do not have any need-based aid for international students. If you are a US citizen abroad, I highly, highly recommend that you complete the FAFSA. Even if you are not sure if your family qualifies for any aid, it's best to just do it and make sure you're not leaving any money on the table. We do have some additional scholarships that are available for all students that do require an additional application. To be eligible for those, you do have to apply by December 1st. And then your departmental run scholarships, so then you'll see the applications, and the next step for those applications are those scholarships specifically.
All right, I will take it from there. Thank you. So at Fordham, we have two options. We have need-based, partial need-based financial aid, and then we have merit scholarships available. So I'll start with the merit scholarships first. There are no separate applications. Each applicant is considered for our merit-based awards, and those awards are available to all students. And so while you don't have to fill anything out, for anyone who is not a US citizen, that will be coming here on an F1 visa or a similar type of visa, we will need you to fill out a statement of finance, just stating that you and your parents understand the cost of attendance at Fordham and that whatever the merit awards that you may receive do not cover, you will be responsible for. The other option is our need-based aid program, which will cover up to the cost of tuition only. So Megan mentioned something a while ago, looking at the cost of attendance and what that includes. So a cost of attendance is kind of the sticker price, right? So everything that goes into affording 1 year at an institution. Tuition is just one of the items in that list of costs. And so this award at Fordham will cover up to the cost of tuition, which means that your family on their CSS profile must be able to demonstrate an ability and willingness to pay around $30,000 a year. We say 30,000 because we rounded up a couple of numbers incorporating things like cost of living, things like insurance and travel, those miscellaneous costs that are not directly billed to you by Fordham. We are only able to meet up to the cost of tuition at this point. So if you are interested in need-based aid, you will simply indicate so on your application, say that you are applying for need-based aid, and then you will have to submit the CSS profile by your application deadline. And then we will take it from there. I will say that in this scenario, we are need aware. So obviously we are looking at what your CSS profile says. And then for those students, we will determine those awards based on a holistic review and whatever the CSS tells us as a part of that holistic review. And finally, just wrapping up for Fordham, merit-based scholarships need blind. That's a need blind scenario. So we will not be looking at any financial information. We will just be looking at your academics and what you've submitted as a part of your application. And now I will pass it over to Sarah.
Great, thank you. And what I love about this panel is I think it really represents kind of just the breadth of policies that you're going to find amongst US institutions when it comes to financial aid, both need-based as well as merit-based scholarships. So at Macalester, we are also need aware in our admissions process. So how much, whether a student's applying for need-based aid and how much need-based aid that student needs is one of many, many factors that we are considering when making an admissions decision. We do that because Macalester, we try to be as generous as possible when it comes to our aid policies. So our commitments, and this is true going into next year, it's not changing at all, is that we guarantee to meet 100% of demonstrated need for every student we admit, regardless of their citizenship status. And so for us, that means not just tuition, it could be room and board, but even in some cases above that for some of those incidental costs as well, things like student health insurance. And so it's quite a financial commitment, especially where, for our students who are studying on F1 visas, because we don't have federal aid that's helping us put those packages together. And so we want to make sure that our financial aid budget is going to be able to cover that promise to each student, not just for the first year, but for all 4 years that you'd be studying at Macalester. We do offer some merit scholarships in addition to our need-based aid program. Usually we, especially for international students, try to put the main focus on need-based aid, but usually depending on the year, about a third of our enrolled international students will likely be offered a merit scholarship as well. Overall, about 2/3 of our international students are receiving some form of either merit and or need-based aid. But you know, just as we are quite generous, I will also just be completely transparent in that the more financial need that a student has, especially an international student, the more competitive that process becomes. So if you are a student who is saying, you know, my family really can't contribute anything, we do fully consider those students, but you should know that that is by far the most competitive pool to be in. And so happy to answer more questions about that. You can always reach out to the Macalester office. But just be aware that for most schools that tend to be very generous with their financial aid policies for international students, they don't have unlimited budgets. And so it can be very, very competitive when you are seeking aid that might be covering most, if not all, of the costs associated with university study. How do you know what that means in terms of how our schools are looking at these financial aid applications and determining what your family will be paying? There are some tools that schools in the US have available. Something that you might hear about is called a net price calculator. This is something actually that US colleges and universities that receive federal funding for financial aid are actually required by law to have somewhere on their website. And so essentially a net price calculator might have different names, but it's there to help families understand and estimate how much and / maybe what type of aid a student could expect from a school. There's lots of different kinds of net price calculators, and it's really as individual as the universities themselves. So just like with everything when it comes to the United States, you need to be organized and you need to look at each individual school to understand what is being offered. Some net price calculators will estimate need-based aid and merit-based scholarships. Some only estimate need-based financial aid. But in general, net price calculators are going to ask you a series of questions. The number and depth really depends on the institution and their calculator. If they're including merit-based scholarships in their net price calculator, they might be asking for things like an SAT score or asking for a calculated GPA on a 4.0 scale. For need-based, they often are going to be asking for information related to your family financial circumstances. It could be how many children are in the family, how many of those children are already in university that are being supported, as well as asking you questions about parent salaries, savings, investments. Do you own your home? Do you owe debt on your home? Do you have any businesses? Things like that. And then based on your answers, you click a button and the internal formula comes out with usually what that family contribution would look like based on your answers. And or it might actually give you a sample financial aid package, again, based on the numbers that you inputted. So it can be helpful. However, as with a lot of things, there are some important items to consider when you're looking at these net price calculators on different university websites. First, they are general tools, right? So they are going to ask general questions. They're not going to be able to get into individual circumstances around things that might, especially this year with the pandemic, be impacting your family, such as job loss, increased medical bills, something out of the ordinary that goes beyond the basic. And so in those situations, it's best to reach out directly to the university financial aid office and ask the question, this has been happening to my family, or my parents have separated and we're confused about something. The net price calculator in general isn't always good at capturing those circumstances. Also, they're individual to each school. So if you are using a net price calculator, you cannot use it once and then assume all US schools are going to offer the same thing. Even schools that are of similar types or have similar policies, because again, that internal calculation that the school is using is individual to each school. So you do have to use it for each school that you are considering. And then they're only as accurate as the information you're putting into them. So if you're using pay stubs or basing the numbers that you're inputting on real data that you have in front of you, and in general they tend to be pretty accurate. But so I've seen families get into trouble where they're projecting what they think next year is going to look like, or they're trying to in their head make adjustments, and if that doesn't pan out, then they're left wondering, why was this so different than what the net price calculator told us? And then finally, and most importantly, these net price calculators tend to be geared towards a US based audience. And so please, 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 when you click on a net price calculator or that side of the website for the university that you're looking at, please pay special attention to any caveats or warnings that they have on their net price calculator. For Macalester, for example, our tools will outright tell you that if you do not live in the United States, regardless of whether a US citizen or not, these tools are not going to be super accurate or useful for you. So again, keep that with a grain of salt. Some schools may even tell you, we don't do aid for international students, so our net price calculator doesn't include that. And that, it's good to keep that in mind. And we know that that can be frustrating as well. And so I think the big takeaway is, when in doubt, reach out. We want you to connect with us even before you get to the point in the process where you've been potentially admitted to a school and you're trying to make sense of their financial aid. In fact, in most cases, we would rather you ask us about our financial aid policies and about certain situations even before you submit an application for admission. Now is a perfect time to start reaching out and asking questions because it is changing quickly, and we know that this is a confusing process, especially if you're not in the United States, and we want to try and help. So I don't know if my colleagues have anything else to add.
I think the only thing that I would repeat and make sure you take home with you today is that we are your biggest advocates on campus. So if you are confused or you're not sure, reach out to us. We are very friendly people, so don't be scared of us. We want to help you through both the application and financial aid and scholarship process. So we at no time do we want you to feel like you aren't supported, by our office or by our campuses. So always reach out to us. It may take us a day to get back to you, but please be patient as we really try to understand your personal situation and how it could affect both your application and your financial aid and scholarships.
I would also just emphasize what you said, Sarah, which I think was great. Do it early. Reach out to us ahead of time. Reach out to us before you submit your application. As I mentioned at Fordham specifically, our financial aid deadline is typically tied to an application deadline. So if you're asking me well past the deadline, it's probably too late. So I would encourage you to ask early, particularly at those schools that are on your short list, like after your extensive college search, those that you're absolutely excited to apply to and want to really attend, certainly reach out to those schools and ask early.
Great, thank you. I think, Megan, you're taking on the next question.
Yeah. So typically when families are asking us about scholarships and financial aid, one of the questions we're always asked is about on-campus work, work study. What does this look like? How much money can a student actually earn? Well, back to understanding some of the terms. So work study is a term that's usually used for a federal U.S. program that's available for U.S. citizens. So it's money that's given basically from the government to support U.S. citizens who are working on campus. Working on campus is also an option. It has nothing to do with study or your visa or passport, anything like that. Any student can get an on-campus job. The limitations for an international student comes from your visa and it dictates the number of hours that you can work on campus, basically. So as you're working on campus, you could work up to 20 hours per week. I honestly tell students, especially in your first year, I don't recommend working more than 10 or 12 hours a week because it's so much to try to balance both going to class full time, really transitioning to the US higher education system, doing all of your, assignments and preparing for tests and exams and quizzes and papers, and also trying to get involved on campus. It's just a lot to manage. So if you get an on-campus job right away, that's awesome. But keep in mind that it's going to take you a lot of time to understand like your work time life balance in there. With that said, you can work up to 20 hours. I typically tell families when you're looking at your budget and thinking about money, the amount of money that a student can earn at their on-campus job is enough to pay for a lot of your day-to-day costs. So your cell phone, maybe your textbooks, if you want to go off campus to eat or go shopping or go to the movies, things like that, that's what it can pay for. It's not going to be enough money to pay for your tuition or fully your living costs. So, think about it as you're earning your pocket money so that way you don't have to call home to mom and dad and say like, hey, this great movie came out this weekend. I really want to see it. Can you send me some money? You'd have money on your own to do it. Usually don't factor that into, how much your tuition and living costs are really going to be. It can be a little different later on at university once you're able to get an internship. So internships can be done off campus. They have to be related to what you're studying, and students will do this through the program CPT, if you've ever heard that phrase. Curricular Practical Training is the long version of it. But in an internship, it's the same rules where during the semester you could work 20 hours a week. During a break, so like winter or summer break, you could work up to 40 hours a week. At an internship, you could earn a lot more money than what you would earn typically at a campus job. This could be enough money to help pay for much more of your living expenses, especially if you're living off of campus. However, an internship is not guaranteed. It's nice to know that when you're thinking about your 4-year plan, that eventually there could be some funds that come in that could help pay for some of this. But I tell families don't necessarily plan on that because once again, your visa is controlled by the US government. So we never know when they're going to change their policies. And also, like I said, it's not a guarantee that you're ever going to get a paid internship. We hope you do. We know that this practical experience is very important to you. We want you to get these, but we can never guarantee anything like that. So it's nice to think about that it could come, but still plan for that full 4 years of what you're initially told by your admissions counselors for what the tuition and really the net price is going to look like. You guys have anything to add to that? Anything that I missed?
The one thing I'll just add is, especially for students on an F1 visa, usually that campus employment option is once again coming out of funds from that specific institution. And so it very well could be, and this is the case, for example, at Macalester, where there's a maximum amount that you can earn each year through that campus work study. It increases each year because as you progress, you might have some additional expenses, and just in general, cost of living goes up. But it's not something where you would want to be working 20 hours a week, because odds are then you would earn your entire amounts within like your first couple months and then not have anything for the rest of the year. So also keep that in mind, that even though there is the capacity to work up to 20 hours per week during the semester, depending on the source of funding for that campus employment, there could be a maximum amount that you can earn each year. At Macalester for first year students, it's $3,100 this year for first year students for campus employment. So just, again, things to keep in mind. Great question to ask, but I would never encourage an international student to look at campus employment as a way to make up significant gaps between financial aid that's being offered and the family contribution.
And on that note, I'll just say something about something we already covered, and that's about scholarships that may have been awarded to you at the time of admission. It's important to ask, are these scholarships increased on an annual basis? As Sarah alluded to, cost of living does go up on a year-to-year basis, and sometimes that includes tuition. Again, every institution is going to be different, especially now with the pandemic. Some institutions are able to halt any increases to tuition, others are not. So when you are awarded a scholarship or looking at specific scholarships, it's also a good opportunity to ask, does this award change? Does it stay the same each year? And what are the criteria for maintaining the award? Typically, if it's a merit scholarship or any scholarship given by an institution, there will be a minimum GPA requirement as well as full-time enrollment status. So those are things that are typically stipulated once you're given the award, and it's important to stay on top of those just so you don't have that award taken away from you. You can also ask, are need-based awards increased annually with the cost of tuition? It's very typical for those institutions that are able to provide need-based aid. Some will, others may have different policies. So again, I think that one of the key takeaways from this entire session is just to ask these specific questions to your admission officers, and if they pass you on to financial aid, to ask those specific questions about the financial aid policies. One final note on, since I've spoken about scholarships a little bit, it's important to know that we want you, if you are considering at any point in your 4-year study period in the United States, if at any point you think you might need financial aid, it's probably best to explore those options in your first year. Most of our institutions will create that budget to assist you throughout your time, and we'll project that budget for the next 4 years and say, okay, if the student is being given this amount of money, it's going to repeat for at least 3 more years. Whereas if you do this, say, in your second or third year, it might be a little too late to create that budget, to create that amount in a set budget already. Of course, there might be some extenuating circumstances if you have a major life event take place that severely alters your ability to pay college tuition and other expenses. At that point, hopefully that doesn't happen, but if that does, it's wise for you to reach out to your financial aid office immediately to see if there are any options available to you. Are there any other points that Sarah or Megan would like to make on that note?
I think the only thing to add is to reiterate what we started with as well, that don't forget we are in a pandemic and our institutions are, you know, set on making sure that we give you scholarships and financial aid, but things are always changing, and especially in a lot of other institutions. We're only 3 institutions of the over 4,000 that exist in the US. So every institution has different circumstances right now. So as we've said many times, really make sure you're reaching out to everybody that you're really considering applying to, and making sure you understand what their policies are going to be. A lot of institutions are like, we've made this commitment, but we may not know exactly what our set scholarships are going to look like for the upcoming year until, you know, the next coming weeks, which is something I started with. We just finished bringing in the freshman class over the last few weeks. So now that we know what this year that we just wrapped up looks like, we're able to set those budgets for the upcoming year and really understand how is the pandemic affecting, you know, each institution, and what does this mean going forward. So, you know, we have a commitment. We know we're going to be offering the same, likely the same merit-based scholarships, but a lot of these things aren't going to be set quite yet of what those, you know, amounts could look like. So once again, make sure you're really staying in touch. Plan early, reach out to us early. This Friday is a great example of being able to do that. Stop by our virtual tables, have a discussion with us. Like I've said, we're very friendly. We want to talk with you. We want to help you through this process. We know it's confusing, and there's a lot of steps to it. So, you know, don't be shy. Make sure to reach out and stay in touch.
Great. Thank you all for watching. And again, we hope to connect with you in the near future.